Hey guys, Coach here. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm glad you took a couple of minutes to join me. Hey, this particular episode is all about protecting the expensive investment that we have to make in plant material nowadays due to inflation, and how to hedge your bets and throw a little bit of insurance your way that the plant material you put in the ground is going to be successful. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started, shall we? Hey, welcome back. Hey, thought I'd take a few minutes out of my daily tasks to sit and talk to you about this after we have invested several hundred, probably closer to $1,800 worth of plant material costs over the past 2 months. And putting these plants, these very expensive plants, some of them anyway, into ground that I'm not super familiar with. So I had to take a few extra precautions to make sure that I was going to have success and not death as a result of the planting process. And most recently, we ended up putting in some additional Parkland pillar birch out front, along with some fire chief arborvitae. And that cost alone, 3 trees, 3 bushes, $400 and some odd. I mean, gobsmacked. So, knowing the ground that I have out front, for the most part, up near the house is somewhat questionable. So what I did to kind of hedge my bet against any sort of failure was to take a few extra steps. I took mini Bosch jackhammer, a digging bar, a shovel, and a whole lot of soil amendment, and made sure that the way I was going to go about it was a hole. The trees came in 10-gallon containers, so the hole was going to have to be twice as deep and twice as wide, with the ledge stone, rock, and other stuff, except for the little tiny kibbles and bits. I don't care about those, but the bigger stuff, they had to come out. So I had just about a wheelbarrow's worth of good soil left over from some of the raised beds. So as I extricated all the rock out and tossed them out in the forest, I used a few shovelfuls extra of the good soil mixed with a lot of planter mix, a 50-50 mix, and then getting them lined up and into the hole and level root ball, etc., caused me to have to really compact the bottom of that hole. Remember, it's twice as deep as the root ball. So if I just put it in there and covered everything up and tamped down the top, that loose soil underneath that root ball would settle over the course of the remainder of the year and forever until it compacted out, which would bring the root flare and the crown of the tree down below grade and would really risk crown rot and weakening of the tree tremendously. So, you know, I did it the way I've always done it, with some extra digging. And so far, after, let's see, 7 days now? 7 or 8 days? No, it's not that long. 5 days. We've had some warmer weather again. The front yard is a southwestern exposure, so it's a lot hotter. So by the time I got these plants in the ground, we're talking days at ground level that's probably approaching 100 degrees. Now the trees are up above the gravel mulch, and I planted these in such a way that by the time I put all the loose tailings from the dig of each hole into a wheelbarrow, mixed it all up with the planter mix, and then put it back on there, the technique that I have used in the past and I used this time was you had a lot more soil than you do hole, because obviously the root ball is taking up a good portion of that hole again. So what do? Well, tamp down the bottom really good, like I mentioned, and then come along and tamp down the sides really good, and then take the rest of the soil in the wheelbarrow and pour it right onto the trunk of the tree. And you're going to end up with this little miniature tree trunk volcano. And everything is all tamped down already. Then get down on your hands and knees, have some gloves. Ladies, if you have good nails, make sure you wear gloves. And just take that volcano and bring it down and out and create a nice picture perfect water basin. And firm up the hill of the water basin really nice. And it makes things so much easier. Instead of trying to scoop it out of the wheelbarrow and do a little dribble of soil in a circle, just dump it right on the trunk of the tree and then take your hands and move it out away from the trunk and make some sweeping motions with your gloved hands into a nice circle, probably, for a 15-gallon or a 10-gallon tree, at least a foot out from the trunk in all directions. And that'll give you a nice water basin of which can capture rain if that's how you plan on doing it, but most likely hand watering or drip irrigation for long-term care. But once they're in the ground, do not rely on a sprinkler system or a drip irrigation system for initial care of plants in the ground. That is a hose dragging event that you have to go out and check fairly regularly and know what kind of soil you have and how much water retention does it have. If you have a real sandy soil, that perks through super fast, like you people up in Michigan, I hate you. God dang. They have such sandy soil, they can just take a shovel and dang near just shove it in the ground all the way to the handle. Yeah, not me. Anyway, it used to be kind of that way out west, but that's not the case anymore. So now that we have our very expensive trees and our expensive plants in the ground, now's the time to give them a super good drink and let that planting hole settle out, and a lot of the air pocket will naturally come out. You won't see it bubble necessarily, but you will see it settle a bit. That's why when you've placed that root ball in that hole and you've really compacted underneath that root ball, that you plant that root ball so it's actually sticking above grade about an inch and a half or so. And then this will allow for any future settling to grade and you'll be good. Now remember, soil around the root flare and the crown of that tree. You want to be able to see that. And if you leave that root ball an inch above, you'll automatically be able to see it. And when that tree goes in the ground, we want to make sure that we've kind of roughed up the roots just a little bit. If it's a really, really super hot day, make sure that you watered an hour or 2 hours before it goes in the ground. And for me, what I did was I watered, I watered at 2 p.m. and I planted at 5 p.m. And I really did a thorough drink, because by the time transportation took place 45 miles away where I bought the trees and then got them home, they were kind of dry. And I needed them to be super wet going in the ground. I did not want to shock these trees at all. At 135 quid per, I did not want to lose them at all. So far, so good. The 3 in the backyard that I planted in June are looking fine. They probably put on maybe, 3 inches or so of some secondary growth for the remainder of their year. And the ones out front, a couple of little yellow leaves here and there, but up here in northern Maine, birch drop a few leaves in August. The native ones and ornamental ones do. They drop some of the older leaves off of the stems this time of year. The tops will still have new growth look to them and are kind of full and lush looking. So if you get a yellow leaf or two, don't freak out on the Parkland pillar birches and any other plant, because there is a natural stress factor that goes into a plant. And remember, I talked about this in one of the videos in the podcast earlier. If you think about what that plant has gone through to get to your house, it's amazing. It's really is amazing. They go from perfect conditions to being shoved into their neighbor and crammed onto pallets and then shoved into trucks and tilted and leaned and bent and transported hundreds or thousands of miles to a nursery, which is a totally different environment from where they were grown in. And then they're shoved into a pickup truck or a car or whatever, transported X number of miles to a place they've never been, to an environment they've never been subjected to, and then they're shoved in ground that could be totally different than anything they've ever had. Imagine someone doing that to you. Yeah, you'd be a little shocky too. You may not have leaves to drop, but yeah, you may be feeling a little different. You know, take yourself from wherever you live and go put you on the top of Mount Denali Mountain up there in Alaska, 20,000 feet. Do you think you'd be in the same condition you were in your living room? Heck no. So think about that for plants as well. These plants here have come a tremendous distance to get to my yard. Thousands of miles, literally. They've gone from Minnesota to North Carolina to Connecticut to Maine to northern Maine. So they've had quite a journey. And it's like I got a new baby in the house again. And I do not take my eyes off them for a second. Hey, one of the biggest stressors that new plants go through is transportation. I've already mentioned that regarding, you know, where they were grown and raised versus trucking and shipping and new environments and new ground. But transportation, when they become your property, is also another concern. So what we did was, from the mom and pop nursery that we got our trees and some of our plants, we employed the offer of tree sleeves for transportation home. The trees were just way too tall to fit inside the cab, so they had to go in the bed of the truck. So they did have tree sleeves, which you can put on over the bucket end of the tree and sleeve them up so it holds them in place. It also preserves a little bit of moisture and protects them mostly from the hot temperatures and surfaces of the bed of your pickup and the blasting wind of maybe freeway speeds. So consider that. If they do not offer things like this where you purchase, and you won't find instruments like that at box stores or Walmarts or anything else. But if you have something like this that you can hollow out for just the trip, the most excellent way to get plant material home. And that's protected, and it's in the shade, and hopefully somewhat cool on the day that you do it. But the plants in a dark environment, even though they may be hot, will be much better than the blasting wind forces that might come along with a pickup bed. So consider safe transportation. And then as soon as they hit your house, make sure that they get a good drink. Make sure that the leaf area is all washed off and cooled down. And then you can start thinking about planting later in the day or the next day after they kind of acclimate to their new home area. Anyway, a little pro tip and a little extra advice to make sure that you succeed in this heavy-duty investment you're making in your property. Now, something else that you can do, I did it for the backyard, but I didn't do it for the front yard because of a time crunch. But I followed up the next day, and that is feeding. Most of the plant material that you get from a nursery, a retail nursery, will not have had any food for quite some time. The potting mix that the tree or the shrub came in may have some slow release fertilizer in the pot. That doesn't mean that that's fresh though. That could be there from last year and there is no more nutritional value to that slow release. And they do not fertilize at a retail nursery. Take it from my own experience. We're not going to throw those kind of costs into a retail plant when what we want is to turn that plant, sell it and get another one and turn it. You know, the old adage of turning your entire nursery 4 times a year is a very profitable nursery. Some do, some do not. But chances are your tree, your shrub, your perennial, whatever you bought, hasn't seen food in a while. So consider giving it a half strength feeding of either a liquid fertilizer, or if you get some organic fertilizer, some dry, make sure it's a starter fertilizer and you mix it into the 50-50 planter mix and native soil when you're planting, and you'll really hedge your bets, because that plant material will definitely use it. Do not feed dry plants. Do not plant dry plants at all costs. The worst thing you can do for a tree or shrub is plant it dry. Chances are your ground isn't necessarily the same, and when a plant is in dry mode, not necessarily wilting yet, but it is dry, it goes into kind of a state of semi-dormancy. It literally, if its root ball is dried up, it cannot uptake very well at all. It cannot uptake water. So that's why we water hours beforehand, and then we water after planting, and we make sure that that root ball is thoroughly saturated and it is in auto mode as far as uptake of moisture at the time. It's got enough to worry about just being planted, having its roots all roughed up, shoved in the ground, planted hopefully correctly after this. It shouldn't have to worry about, God, I really wish I could get a drink, you know? So pay attention to that. It's my firm belief, and I'll stand on this adage to anybody who wants to debate me, and that is, plants, just like food at the grocery store, have gone through the roof as far as inflationary costs. Not totally prohibitive, but it sure makes you think how much you need before you go buying nowadays. When you leave that nursery, spend the extra dollars and pick up the bagged material, or if you have a bulk material place nearby that sells a good quality compost, any of those things, 50-50 mix of your native soil and plant it correctly. Leave it about an inch high or so, and make sure that the plant gets its drink before it goes in the hole. After you have everything planted and mulched, go back through and water again. And then literally, if you're planting in the warmer months of summer like I was, make sure it's a daily check. A daily check. Even if you have rain. So you can see, by taking just a couple extra minutes and an extra step or two, how you can take a very expensive trees and shrubs nowadays and become successful as far as getting them in the ground, and long term they are successful for you, not immediate term. I thank those people who reached out this particular week for questions and answers. I hope I responded quickly enough for you and also correctly for you. I'll see you guys next week. As always, to your landscape success. Make sure you take those extra steps and protect your expensive plant investment, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye for now.